He came running through the cold evening streets, breath shaking, fear tightening every step. A boy too young to carry so much terror, yet old enough to understand that no one else would help him. Behind him was a truth too painful to speak, a violence no child should ever witness. And ahead of him stood the one man the entire neighborhood feared, yet trusted more than the system that always failed them. And as you listen to what pushed this child into the darkness of desperation, let me know in the comments what you would have done in his place. Your thoughts might help someone understand the story even deeper. If stories like this matter to you, don't forget to tap the like button so this message reaches more people who need to hear it. What forced a terrified black boy to seek protection from a mafia boss? And what happened when their worlds collided? The answer would expose a reality many still choose to ignore. He was a quiet boy living in a neighborhood that never truly welcomed him. Most days, he blended into the background, moving between school and home with the cautious awareness that children learn too early in places where they are watched more than they are protected. His mother worked long hours, stitching together whatever she could to keep their small apartment warm and their lives steady. She carried her strength quietly, the kind that grows from surviving a world that never gives you room to breathe. The boy admired her, even when the world didn't. But lately, things around their building had begun to shift. Strange faces lingered near the stairwell, the kind of faces that evaluated people like threats or opportunities. The landlord's tone had sharpened, neighbors whispered more, and tension crawled beneath the surface of their daily routine. The boy felt it, an unease he couldn't name but couldn't ignore. He noticed how his mother seemed more tired, more cautious, as if she sensed something building in the air. She moved through their home with the careful silence of someone trying not to attract attention. Yet no matter how hard she tried, the world around them had already begun closing in. And only a few blocks away lived a man whose name carried both fear and protection. A man outsiders feared but locals quietly respected because, in a place where systems failed them, he was the only one who didn't look away. The boy didn't know it yet, but the invisible lines between their lives were already tightening. Something was coming. Something that would shatter the thin layer of safety they had left and force him to run toward the last person anyone expected. The unease that lingered around their building soon took shape in ways the boy could no longer ignore. It began with small things: doors left ajar, echoes of raised voices behind thin walls, and unfamiliar men pacing the hallways late at night. But the boy sensed something darker hiding beneath these disruptions, something directed at his mother more than anyone else. She had become a target without knowing why. A quiet presence suddenly treated as a problem in a place she had lived peacefully for years. One evening, while returning home, the boy noticed two men standing by their apartment door. Their eyes trailed over him with a coldness he felt deep in his bones. They stepped aside without speaking, but the message was sharp enough to cut through the hallway air. Inside, his mother sat trembling, her hands clenched tightly as if bracing against an invisible attack. She tried to reassure him with a forced calmness, yet he could see through the cracks. Something had happened, something she didn't want to burden him with. The tension escalated quickly. The landlord began visiting more often, inspecting their apartment with an aggression that felt personal. Rumors spread that the new owners of the building wanted them out but couldn't justify it legally. So pressure replaced paperwork. Threats replaced notices. And the boy watched helplessly as this storm folded around his mother, tightening its grip each day. One night, the boy awoke to the sound of shattering glass. His heart raced as he crept to the living room, finding his mother standing amid fragments glistening on the floor. A warning had been thrown through their window, a reminder that they were unwelcome. She swept the pieces away in silence, her trembling hands revealing more truth than her words ever could. The boy understood that this was no random act. It was a message. A racist message, delivered by those who believed fear was enough to push them out. But fear didn't leave. It grew. And then came the breaking point. The boy returned from school one afternoon only to hear muffled commotion from inside their apartment. A harsh thud followed by a desperate cry sent him sprinting forward, panic drowning out every thought. He pushed open the door and froze at the sight of men surrounding his mother, their aggression driven by cruelty and entitlement. They towered over her as she struggled against their violence, her strength fading beneath their blows. The boy's world fractured in that moment. No neighbors intervened. No authority would have come in time. He knew the truth with painful clarity. No one who was supposed to protect them ever did. But there was one man in the neighborhood whose name carried weight no one dared challenge. And with tears burning down his face, the boy did the only thing he could: he ran. And if you're still here listening, take a moment to stay with this story till the end. The reality behind what happens next is something people rarely talk about, and it deserves to be heard without skipping a second. He didn't know if the Mafia boss would help him. He didn't know if he would even listen. But he knew one thing: if he didn't reach him in time, his mother might not survive the night. He reached the Mafia boss's building with lungs burning and vision blurring, but the weight of fear pushed him forward. The guard stepped toward him, prepared to dismiss him as just another kid from a neighborhood that never mattered, but something in his eyes stopped them. He was shaking, breath broken, terror radiating off him so strongly that even hardened men paused. Within seconds, he was taken inside, his urgency impossible to ignore. The boss listened, silent and still, as the boy forced out the story: the violence, the men, the danger suffocating his mother inside their own home. The boy expected indifference, maybe even rejection, but instead he saw something shift in the man's expression. The boss had built his empire on control, but he had also survived the same racism, the same dismissals from a world where power was rarely handed to men who looked like him. He understood injustice in a way the boy never expected. Within minutes, the room erupted into movement. Cars were pulled out, men armed themselves, and the boy found himself surrounded by a force more organized and determined than anything the authorities had ever offered his family. They moved through the dark streets with a purpose that sent fear rippling through the neighborhood. When they reached the apartment, the hallway was eerily silent, until a muffled cry broke through the walls. The boss stepped forward, his men pushing open the door with a violence that mirrored the cruelty inside. The sight that followed would burn itself into the boy's memory forever: his mother bruised and cornered, the attackers startled by the sudden surge of power storming into the room. What happened next unfolded in seconds, swift, decisive, and unstoppable. The men who had terrorized an unprotected woman found themselves facing a power they never anticipated. And for the first time in his life, the boy witnessed something he had never seen before: someone had finally shown up for them. But the night wasn't over. And what came after would test everything they thought they knew about justice, loyalty, and the real cost of protection. When the chaos finally settled, the boy stood beside his mother, shaken but no longer alone. The men who had tormented her were dragged out into the hallway, stripped of the power they once abused so freely. For the first time since the nightmare began, the apartment felt still. Not safe, not yet, but no longer a battlefield. His mother leaned on him, exhausted, bruised, but alive. And in that fragile moment, he realized how close he had come to losing the only person who had ever truly protected him. The Mafia boss didn't stay long. He left behind a warning, one that traveled through the neighborhood faster than any report or investigation ever could. Those responsible would never return. The landlord's sudden silence, the neighbors' newfound caution, the disappearance of the men who once patrolled the halls with entitlement, it all traced back to a single truth: someone with real power finally chose to stand beside a family that the system ignored. But the impact of that night lingered far beyond the walls of their home. The boy carried the memory with him, of running through the streets, of fear tightening his chest, of the world that forced him to seek protection from men outside the law because the ones within it had never heard his cries. His mother healed slowly, her strength returning piece by piece, yet the emotional marks remained as reminders of how fragile safety could be for people who looked like them. Their story wasn't unique. It echoed thousands of others, families cornered, threatened, unheard. A reality where protection isn't guaranteed, justice isn't equal, and survival often depends on who decides your life is worth defending. And so the question remains: how many more stories like theirs will unfold in silence before the world finally confronts the injustice it keeps trying to hide? And if this story moved you, even a little, consider subscribing so you don't miss the stories people try to silence. Your support helps these voices stay alive and helps more listeners find the truth we often overlook.